Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
Hey there, it's Jeff. Thanks for coming back to the GSD podcast. Always grateful that you're listening. Today's podcast is with James Stuart of Reed Company over in England. I met James through one of our implementation communities, and when he started telling me about what he was doing, I was like, I got to get you on this podcast. I had never heard of anybody doing it. And it's a really, really smart way of doing things. James is responsible. He works in the customer success department. However, he runs the sales trials, which if you think about it is super smart, because usually what happens is it's a sales driven with sales engineers basically setting people up, giving them some limited functionality and access to the product. Instead, what they're doing, and I'll let James take it over in the episode, is they're having success walk them through in sort of the success way of doing things and making sure that there's goals and success metrics and that they get trained and implemented properly on the product so that when it comes to evaluating the trial, they've had a really in-depth and successful way of looking at the product and implementing it. And anyways, I thought it was great. I'm not going to give it any justice in this intro. So definitely listen to James. He's got a great accent, and give it a whirl. And let me know your feedback if you got any, and I'll talk to you next time.
I'll record on this computer, and we are recording, and we might be a little rushed because we just got into a big conversation on soccer, but I wanted to thank James for coming on. Why don't you come on and say the company that you're at and what's your big focus that you're working on there right now?
Yeah, so I'm James. I'm at reed.co.uk, one of the large job boards within the UK. Sort of my internal focus at the moment is just working with some of our new sales channels. We were working with a sales channel traditionally, and then we've now sort of moved on to working and integrating another sales channel. So just working within that team, supporting them, ensuring sort of like they're asking the right questions and data analysis and that kind of thing. Yep. Just getting them, just introducing to the way we work to sort of help them in the future when they're speaking to their customers that yep. we may not necessarily speak to.
Yep. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on and to talk to you about this stuff was because nobody ever really comes on and talks about the pre-sales aspects of things, right? A lot of people really focus, especially in our community, on the customer has signed, how do we get them live, how do we get them to get through success and get more seats and get success and all the fun CSAT and NPS numbers and things like that. But you have a big job to do to get before that, right? And you're super active and working with the sales team and everything. When do you actually get brought in by the business development team? At what point in time?
It varies, but traditionally just before sort of the pre-trial agreement is signed, we would have a sort of a sit down with the sales team, do a bit of research on the customer, listen to the sales team's conversations, and then what we would do then is we would have an introduction call with that customer, introducing myself, explaining the differences in roles between myself and the sales guys, and then sort of understand then a little bit more about what the customer needs, who's involved within the company, and what the role is within that organization, just so that we can work out, who our end users are, who our influencers are, decision makers, etc. So we know the type of communication and what support each individual would need. And then we will sort of, once we've established that, start the onboarding process. So that's sort of like pre-onboarding, if you like. And then the full onboarding would start. So, the login details, the training, that kind of thing would start then, all the way to usability.
It sounds like in order for this to work, that it would be like a pretty structured process. Like a lot of people's trial processes aren't that. It's like, okay, here's some seats, here's a URL, here we created some login information, there's some training videos over here. It sounds like what I'm guessing, and we did talk a little bit about this, it's sort of like we have 2 weeks to prove success, or 4 weeks. So what's the best way for us to get this customer to the place where they're actually going to sign to be real customers?
No, it has to be. I think because for two things, I think structure does lead to success, because you've worked out a method in which way your customer can have the best experience all the time. So it's important to have that structure, but also as well, like you said, because we've also got such a short amount of time, we need to make sure that we touch on certain touch points and actually we hit those. And to do that, we have to create a structure to say, by day 1, we needed to have this done. By day 3, X needs to be done 5, 7, 12, etc. So that, because we only have potentially 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, and sometimes, there could be 20, 25 users, we have to do it so that the customer has a great experience, and also we have the chance to prove ourselves. What we don't want is just to, if it's a bit all over the place, then actually, it doesn't always build credibility, and things like that. And obviously, we need to make sure that, we're credible in the service that we're providing.
Right. How are you able to, are you getting the success criteria from the sales team, or are you getting it in sort of that kickoff meeting? Hey, we've got 25 people. Are you getting to the point where it's like, if we do X, like, if we show, Y type of, success, or if you say you need to get, 20 people to be able to do these types of tasks, then it's a success, and then we'll consider it. How are you getting to those types of those?
We would have a discussion with the sales team first, because ultimately they would have spoken to them and understood their problems beforehand, because so they can match the appropriate product to fix the solution. But that's quite like sort of large scale. When we had that kickoff call, we would then look at actually what are we able to do in the short amount of time to prove success, because they could obviously, when they maybe speak to them, they may be saying, this is my 12-month plan, this is why I want to do, this is what I want to do over the next quarter, etc. But we don't have that. So it's all about setting those sort of smart objectives. I think one of the things that, one of the challenges that I often see with success criteria is they're not always quantifiable. So at the end of it, a lot could go on gut feel, whereas what we like to try and do is make it a quantifiable measure, so that at the end of it, we can go, you asked us to do X or provide X, we have provided, 10% over, 5% under, or etc. So that we can, it's a much easier conversation to have. Whereas if you've got a product and you're just saying, I want, it's more of a feel or more of an emotion, it's hard to quantify that. So we like to sort of make sure that we're asking those smart, objective questions. And like I say, we've only got a short amount of time, so we need to make it realistic.
Right. So you drive everything through that trial period, as in these are the success criteria. We're going to drive towards that. There's many things we can do, but we agree that this is what can be done. So anything that kind of comes out of that scope, you can point back to hey, we agreed we're going to, or how does this new request kind of map back to that success criteria?
So generally what we do is we've had the conversation at the start. and then throughout the process, then so if we just take a 4-week trial, because that's what we'd work.
Yeah, sounds good.
You would have like day one would be like kickoff call, where we would lay down the success criteria. Then end of say week one, generally provide reporting to the customer of tracking on that success criteria. Then what we would normally do then is have like a mid-trial call where we would reintroduce the sales team and say, we're having a mid-trial call where we actually discuss the progress, challenges faced, any obstacles and how we're going to combat them, and also we'll then map it back to the success criteria to say, so are we on track to hit X? What's the current run rate looking like? Week 3, then we would, the reporting start again to map it out, and then week 4, then we would bring the sales teams back in, and we would have that final end of trial call. But one of the things I always say to my customers is, we should have a really good understanding by week 4 of what if we're going to progress or not, because we should have been having meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
Throughout those, what we don't want to hear at the end of week 4 is, I wish we saw this, or I wish we could do this, or I wish we did that. I always go at the start saying that's the worst question I think you could always ask in a trial, because it clearly shows you've not listened to the customer, or you've not been able to have proper conversations with the customer. Regardless if it's a yes or no, you should be able to gauge where you're at by the end of week 4.
Absolutely. Do you feel that by going through this sort of regimented pre-sales trial process, that normal, whatever those are, the regular onboarding process once a customer is signed up is a little bit smoother?
I think so, yeah.
Do you have situations where people don't go through a trial process and then they just go through the normal onboarding process?
Yeah. There is customers that will just buy a package outright.
Yep.
And then they'll have the usual, then they'll go straight from pre-sale. So it'll always be 9 times out of 10, it'll always be business development, and it might just be a business development to account management handover without that customer trial period in the middle. We do that, but that's why what we like to do as well is sort of, when I speak to my sales partners, I like to give them information regarding not just if they use us as a trial, but actually information to arm them regardless of trial or not. They might be having a trial, but it might not be the size to justify it, or the length of time to justify having a customer success. It might be a 1 day or a 3-day or 5-day trial where they just want to test the product out. But we can still arm them with information of this is how to ask for your success criteria, this is how to onboard a customer correctly, that kind of thing. And that's what we like to try and do, so that that whole education piece. Do you I have another question, but I have to ask this one first to get there. Do you work on normal post-trial implementation and onboardings, or is that a separate team? No, that's a separate team. What we would do is we have a handover, so we work on anything 12 months or less, or generally 12 months or less, because that's like an annual package. So the easy way, internally, what we would say is, if it sits with business development, it sits with our team. If it sits with account manager, it sits with a separate team. That's the easiest way we look at it.
Well, 1 year is, for a lot of new SaaS companies, that's a contract. It's trying everything out for the 1 year, and then you try and get to the 3-year agreement after that, or whatever.
So traditionally we work in 1 year agreements in terms of annual. We tend to work in annual contracts, as in like from business development to account manager. The idea is you trial a contract, and then we would pass that on to business development would then say, would you like to sign up for an annual? 9 times out of 10, COVID has slightly changed that a little bit, where we're seeing a lot shorter agreements. So sometimes what we're seeing is actually working with customers longer term, just on shorts, which will still sit with sit with me. I'm actually working on a few 6-month contracts at the moment, because it's shorter term contracts because of where they're at in their recruitment, etc. And we are seeing that, but generally it's, you know, the pre-sale turned into an annual.
Yeah. How involved are the salespeople bugging you every day, every week, seeing how the trials are going? Or
no, because we have, so what we like to do is we have a regular meeting each week, whereby all sales partners and all CS come together and discuss all the trials. I think the one thing we do as well, so every morning we would always have like a huddle.
Yeah.
We can join the huddle to say a little bit of an update of where we're at. So we have quite a lot of internal communication, which then eradicates the need for every couple of, you know, every people checking up and that kind of thing. Which I think it must be working, because we don't get a lot of questions internally, because we're the ones that, you know, that conversation's flowing already.
Yeah.
So that generally works quite well. But I think if you are getting a lot of questions by, you know, from either side, then generally you'd say that communication and level of it's probably not there.
Yeah, gotcha. Understood. So how actually, I know we talked a little bit, and we wanted to go over sort of in this short trial phase the best ways to build trust along the way, so that they'll want to convert and everything. Do you have sort of, I don't want to say tactics, because that sounds like a bad word, but like, what are your best proven methods for obviously listening, which you talked about as well, but
I think there's three things that we need to do to sort of build credibility in the market. I think the first thing is to be the person to provide like insights to the customer, or a sector expert that they can't find anywhere else. So actually you are that industry expert or that product expert.
Yep.
That they can't just go and see, you know, they can't just get this information from everyone else. I think that builds a lot of credibility. I think like little proven wins. So setting little, you know, I always say find the quickest way to add value. That's one thing that I always got taught. And the quicker you can add value to that customer, the quicker you can enhance credibility. And it could be a really small change. You know, it doesn't have to be a big, massive process change. It could be a little small change, but that could have a benefit to the customer. It could reduce, you know, their time to value, or time to, you know, do something. And I think that'll add credibility. And I think the ultimate thing as well is just by completing the objectives you set.
Right.
You know, actually just instead of promising the world, just promise little objectives and hitting them, which then builds trust. Then you actually, hang on a minute, the last 3 times he said he's going to do X, Y, Z, he's done it. It's worked.
Yep.
Well, now we can carry on trusting him. Whereas, you know, if I said to you, I'm going to save you $10 million, well, that's quite a big, massive objective. Whereas if I'm going to say, yeah, I'll save you 20 minutes per process you do, which in the long run could save you X. Well, actually, it's more realistic, and you're building trust that way.
Right. Yeah. No, that's this all sounds great, because it's very human. It's very tangible. I especially always preach about the insight, being able to provide that. Well, I tell a lot of new groups when they're coming up on board, is they're usually pretty humble. Sometimes lacking the self-confidence to be able to feel like they have that insight, and but they don't realize they're in it, and they're working every day, and they're working with some of your new customers, competitors and peers and things like that. And you can say like, oh, this is what people in your industry are doing, right? You can say, you know, you don't want to name drop too much, but oh, this is what we did for X and Y and Z, and they're all in the peers of this other company. And they're suddenly like, oh, that's great, because everybody wants some validation and things like that.
Yeah.
And your team and the people that are responsible for the onboarding, the implementation, the trials and things like that, if they're working with the software and the customers, they're building up a lot of this insight that really nobody else has. The sales team usually doesn't. They know that there was some success over here, and they know what the product does. But being able to really map sort of the business problems to how your software kind of addresses those business problems, that's a huge skill set that a lot of people, I don't think, put as much value into this sort of post-sale, or, you know, you're in a different model, which I really like. And I'm going to be digging into this a little bit more, because not everybody goes through this. It's a standard, you know, maybe even a really elongated sales cycle, and then suddenly, then a long implementation period, especially if it's like an enterprise. Like enterprise deals usually take a long time to close, six plus months or something, and then they want to do a ton of stuff to get you off the ground, integrations and things like that. Does your team wind up dealing with those at all? Like, hey, we've got to integrate the system.
Yeah, but I think so. Just to finish on the insight thing, I think as well. I think insights can be overcomplicated. I always think a really good format of insights, is this is the data, this is what the data is telling us. Therefore, based on this data, you should do X, Y, and Z. And I think it can be a lot of the times insights can be like a really complicated. They think it has to be really fancy and stuff like that, but it's not. All it is effectively insights is just recommendations based on your industry data. And I think if you simplify it that way, I think the customer will understand it a lot more. They'll be more receptive,
right?
And it'll be easier. Where instead of saying, "Oh yeah, you're changing all this, that, and the other," it's not. You're just basing a recommendation of what that information is telling you to do.
Absolutely. I even see that with like a slight change to Google Analytics, and I'm not quite sure exactly when it was, but before you just went in and you looked at a ton of data, right? Like, oh, it's a nice chart. You see some this and there, but then they started putting those questions that you wanted answered on the right side, like, what are my customers doing? What's the content that they're looking at? And those types of insights. But you're right, it's answering these questions. It's not coming back with this massive report or things like that. So it's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. It's great.
But in terms of integration, so that's another part of it. So like the technical aspect of like in terms of technical aspect, I don't do necessarily technical builds or anything like that, but effectively it's like acting like the middle person just to ensure that the technical aspects work. So the integration between the two softwares work. So what we have is we work with the called ATS systems. So it's an application tracking system. Effectively, it's a big HR tool that the candidate, the customers
people upload their resumes, and then exactly.
Yeah, and then also then in the other terms, then a resume can go from an application can go from our site into their site.
Okay.
So that they can view it all in their own system, and it goes that way. And we sort of help set that up in terms of liaising with our company and their company, and acting like the middle person and answering some technical questions. So we'll have like a list of FAQs that we would generally answer, and if it gets past this, then it's sort of like the how like the IT support where you have like the front desk, but we're generally that front desk sort of support whereby the normal questions. If it gets past that, then it generally needs a more technical knowledge or a software developer or something like that, because it's actually a real technical problem. But we do a lot of the front, first desk support and setting up that way as well. To ensure that the customers are integrated.
Where is all this data getting tracked about all the things that you're doing? So you want that one. I don't need necessarily know what system. Like I don't need to know the brand name, but you're doing a lot in pre-sales that most don't normally do, and then you're having to sort of probably transition over to the account management team, maybe even extended onboarding and implementation. Is that inside of like a CRM system, or is that just a knowledge transfer that you hand over your notes over?
No, so we have a few things. So like we have a few documents that we complete. So like handover doc. So we have a handover document / kickoff call with account management and sales, without the customer saying, these are the strengths, the weaknesses, this is what's gone on, and they have like a document of key users, individuals who their roles in the company, products that they use, products that they bought, the success criteria of our of the trial, and then sort of like anything that you've picked up. So they've mentioned that the next 12 months they're going to be making X amount of hires, so we can pass that knowledge on. In terms of our own industry specific, as a team, we've been doing a lot of document creation. So technical questions and like FAQs internally that not necessarily showed with the customer.
Right.
But basically it's documentation to help us provide answers to the customers. So we've been doing a lot of that, and like sort of like, you know, process playbooks, so you know, like and timelines, etc., where you should be, so that it's like and obviously the idea is internally we would have a place or a location whereby we can access that gives us different scenarios and sort of like key tips to answer that, and what a general trial would look like and key milestones, so that it's more for new starters. So if we do get a new starter on board, you know, we do have reference points of, you know, these are documents to read and location and familiar yourself with, so that you are aware of the trial process. And it's very high level because, you know, this is what you would expect in your roles and responsibilities. And also, but most importantly, how to answer the questions and that kind of thing. So we are doing a lot of that at the moment.
Yeah, no, that was because I know we wanted to cover that sort of handoff and that readiness and aspects. And then from there, typically the account management team, and they'll have their own sort of, I don't want to say real process, but like this sort of more involved next process to get a whole bunch more users up and agreement, things like that. Yeah. As we talked about earlier, I can only imagine that's smoother. This is such a new model to me, probably because it's a larger company and things like that, where it makes total sense. Where I'm just so used to like, oh no, we're going to build some custom stuff and, you know, give it to them for like a week or two and, you know, see if that works. You know, one of my customers is a little larger and they have some people that they brought from a larger company, and they are doing like, here's your proof of value. Do we agree that if you go through this proof of value, then you will move over to the next phase? And I always felt that was a little bit of like pushing a little bit, but actually, I don't know if you had a perspective on that. Do you, if it's success criteria, more of a conversation here, but spitballing, but maybe if it's success criteria, but not of this, like, if you do this, you'll sign for the next agreement. Is that sort of how it's phased, or it's sort of like, hey, you're having a trial. These are the things we're going to try and prove. If they prove it, then you'll have a conversation somewhere else, and maybe you guys will become a customer.
It's not as blunt of if we tick these boxes, here's the contract you must sign, but it's more a case of what do we need to prove, or what do we need to show you that would make it valuable for you to have this product? Because ultimately, it's, you know, there's obviously the customer has budgets and that kind of thing, and it's often like, what do you need to see to show this is value for you to spend? You know, is it? And it's like that kind of thing, because obviously there are competitors out there, like every industry.
Right.
We've got, so it's, you know, it's what do we need to do to set aside from our competitors? Why, you know, and why would you come with us rather than going with one of our competitors? Is it you want to see, you know, this many specific applications? Do you want to see we have a certain size of a talent pool in a certain area? That kind of thing. So it's not necessarily you've got to do this to sign, but I think you've got to have a format to work towards to show value at the end of it, and a structure for that, because the success criteria 9 times out of 10 will relate back to the organisation goals of what they want to see. And if you know their goals of what you want to see, then you can work towards hitting those goals. And obviously, you know, the difference between you know, success and support is actually we're understanding what the customer's goals are and actually formulating a plan and a product to actually ensure they hit those targets and those goals.
Right.
So we need to know them, and that's how obviously we would see the success criteria, like planning out sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm just apologies that I'm so fascinated by this with the difference that I'm normally seeing in SaaS. So 1 or 2 more questions on it. When you have the year trial, are you doing some of the standard CSM types of activities like a QBR? I know you have this sort of sales call where you're getting together with the sales team. Do you structure that like a QBR or any of those types of normal CSM things?
On the longer term trial, so I'm currently working with a customer that's doing a 6-month trial. We don't do QBRs. We do monthly business reviews only because of the time frame. I think if we do a QBR, I think there's not enough conversation, like, you know, tangible meetings within that.
Right.
To actually, you know, 3 months out of 6 months is half the contract gone. Effectively, we won't be able to have one
You basically
meeting.
have one, and then there's time to decide if they're gonna.
Yeah. So we decided to have a monthly review instead. But effectively, we do a CSM process. Just very short. So we would have the intro call. Then we would have a mid-trial meeting of, say, it was 4 weeks, which is the equivalent of a QBR. Then we would have like an end of trial review. So that's like the second QBR. And then there's like a renewal discussion. So it's the same life cycle, just in a much shorter process. And it's a lot more fluid. So depending on the length of the trial, depending on how many meetings we would have, how many times we would contact the customer, and where they would fall within the process. So, you know, a 3-month trial would generally be 3 meetings with regular reporting and catch-ups. But when I say catch-ups, they're more just a really top-level 15 minutes, how are things going sort of thing. You know, are you facing any challenges at the moment? And then we will have a lot more tangible mid-trial review call, or trial review call, we call it, whereby we would get the statistics up. We would ask them how they're performing at their end. Similar to the way we do a QBR. So
top users, you know, any bug stuff, like, you know, education things.
So we've basically got that CSM life cycle, but we've just adapted it over a much shorter period, and it's just a lot more fluid in terms of the length we do things over a certain time.
It's like using CSMs to win trials, basically, because you're putting them into the hands of the people that really know how to use the software and everything. I love it. Wow, so this is great. I have so many ideas and things for me to think about. Are you putting them through like your classic education types of stuff too, like an LMS or you know, videos to go watch and things like that, or is it more you're doing some hands-on training and things like that?
So it's more hands-on training. So for like typically, you know, today I had a training session with a couple of users on who are new to the product. So it's a lot more. So it's a lot more hand-holding touch rather than that tech touch approach of, you know, here is, you know, the classic tech touch approach whereby here is a program, an education program whereby you have a step-by-step of video.
It's very generic.
Whereas we do it very much. I speak to all the users that are involved. We do like live training, so, you know, screen sharing, and I'll walk them through how to use the product with opportunities to answer questions. And then following that, then we have a bit of a monitoring period whereby, are they logging in? Are they posting jobs? What's the performance look like? What do the jobs look like? Just so then we can understand then, are they using it, and if there's any more challenges along the way, and then we can feedback that. We can feedback that then to say it's more the influencer, because obviously the decision maker is often sort of like, you know, the head of, or the finance director or something like that, who don't really touch it. More the recruitment manager or the recruitment team leader or someone like that who oversees that project, and who we assign more as the influencer. Relay that information back, saying, you know, this is what we're finding, we may need to do more sessions here, or, you know, might get communications from the end users to say, oh, this is, you know, I don't understand that.
If you don't mind me asking, I can just edit it right out if you don't like it. Are or in other people like you, instead of your KPIs being around like churn and percentage like that and renewal rates and things like that, are they on successful trial conversions? Is that a part of?
Exactly. So that's how we operate. You know, it's trial conversions. is the main. Obviously, within that, you have your outputs and that kind of thing. But the key measure of success is trial conversions.
Yeah, yeah. And then does your department report into sales or into account management?
Neither. So it's effectively, we report into the head of CS.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Oh, sorry. We have those issues, this industry, some people, I meant CS. I've always in my head called account management CS because
the
in the
why I
old
say that is
days,
because we have account management. So it's like 3 channels.
yeah,
So sales is a channel.
yeah,
Account management is a channel, and CS is a channel.
yeah.
So
As well, it should be. That's the model I prescribe. It gets a little confusing sometimes. Some people, they'll have CSMs, but for the people who go off and get new business inside your existing business, where does that lie? I think that should be in sales, but regardless. So it's just, there's a couple different models out there. And again, it's what works for your organization, not necessarily.
And I think as well, what I like to do is I'm always quite upfront with the customer. And I'll explain, saying I am customer focused, and basically sort of not detach myself from sales, but say I don't know anything about the pricing model. I don't know packages, things like that, so that they can separate the 2 roles.
Yeah.
But I think because I don't know about that.
Then they know this is. I say this 100% when I try and get CS involved in pre-sales, because they know you're not commission based, you're just trying to help them out, and there's a huge, that's such a relief to the people when you're talking to them, because they know you're not coming at this from like a monetary conversation. You're coming at it from a, how do I make you successful with the software conversation.
And I think as well, I think it is key, because again, it goes back to the trust we built before. We're actually making recommendations to make it work. Rather than, if I recommend a product to someone, I'm not recommending it to buy it. I'm recommending it because this product suits your needs. If you do want to purchase it, then that's when you would bring the sales partner in, and then
go talk to this guy.
Exactly. There. Because I think it's really key to know that I'm making these recommendations to make it successful, and also as well is to know. They're not just bringing in another salesperson. We would have that call. And I think, like I say, I think the biggest thing is separation of boundaries. So you know who is responsible for what, and then the customer then knows who to contact regarding what. There's nothing worse than you send me an email saying, "Hi, can I have prices? Sorry, I want to forward this on to someone else," because it looks like palming you off, but it's not. It's because this is their area of expertise. This is what they have control over. This is mine. So setting those boundaries at the start.
Yeah. Just about to say that part of your kickoff call, right? Like, that this is what I do. If you have a conversation on this is that person's responsibilities. And then again, reinforces.
It always goes back to me, like project management. When you've got project management and you'll have, so, and you're scoping out roles and responsibilities. So finance, you're in charge of this. IT, you're in charge of this. HR, you're in charge of this, and then when you're splitting out the work, right? This is an integration, right? Send that to IT. Oh, this is to do with money. Send that to finance. This is to do with people. Send that to HR. And then you can scope it out a lot easier rather than thinking, well, who do I send this to, sort of thing. And again, it's similar that way.
Yeah. No, that's the professional way to do it. And a lot of startups struggle with that, and they feel like when you bring in these types of processes, like, oh no, we're so over processing things and things like that. And it's like, well, no, do it for what you need, but let's look at the problems that keep coming up. And those are huge ones when you're trying to show professionalism to a trial. Like if you're working, especially if you're selling to enterprises and you're like, these guys are buttoned up, they know what they're doing, they get their stuff together, then they're going to feel a lot more confidence in signing the line versus like, oh, we'll get back to you on that. Like, who writes the contract? And not quite sure. And it just doesn't show like you guys have been around long enough for them to trust you or something like that. Yeah. So James, couple minutes here. There's always stuff to improve and work on. If you were to fix sort of one thing for this year, like your 2021 goal for improvement for how things currently are, what would that be?
I think the one thing I think we can always improve on is it still is the success criteria. So it's making sure that every time it is still quantifiable. You know, understanding that different customers will have different measures, but trying to make it a quantifiable success criteria. I think that's going to be, I think that's everyone's challenge. And I think that's one of the most difficult things to do. Is actually having a success criteria that is quantifiable and realistic. Because sometimes, you know, you might think you want to promise the world, but you've only got 4 weeks to do it. You actually need to take a step back and go, what can I realistically do in 4 weeks or in 3 months? Because if I don't understand that, I'm just going to fail, because the customer's going to think I can't do what I've set out to do. So that's probably like the biggest thing that I'm always personally working on, is that model.
No, that makes total sense, and I can see it. And especially, even have a smaller number of users. You know, even if you had 5 users, but they were super successful, isn't that amazing, right? Like versus like, you know, no, our goal is to get, you know, this huge number of people ramped up. I'm like, great. Well, okay, if you onboarded 50 to 100 people in 4 weeks, like, I'm not sure that people will get any tangible benefits out of the software or anything like that. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's it. I think that is one of the big things, like you say, you know, and it's also like with the realistic side, it's about understanding the customer's process. So actually, when we, so an example would be in our world would be, so if a customer said to us they want to make 10 hires in 4 weeks, well, I would ask them, how long does it take for you to hire a candidate? They go 8 weeks. Well, we're not going to do that. We've got 4 weeks and telling you it's going to take 8 weeks. Where do you actually, in 8 weeks, in 4 weeks time, where is a candidate in your hiring journey? Oh, well, they're at first stage interview. Well, isn't actually a more realistic target? We get X amount of candidates to first stage interview, because we can measure that. It's within your scope of hiring, that kind of thing. And I think often, I don't think people ask the customer questions that actually will help that. You know, and actually, what is the journey of using this product?
And it's, and especially in your vertical, you know, getting into even numbers, like, I mean, not being able to hire fast is a huge problem, right? You might be using contractors, which are expensive to offset, or you might not be, you know, the opportunity cost of not being able to bring people on, which I'm sure is Reed's sort of value prop as well too, and things like that. So yeah, I feel like I don't do a great job of this as well too. So just asking and hearing your answers to that question, just getting that, you know, very tangible, you know, able to laser in. It's not too gray, and you can look at numbers and quantify it instead of it being sort of subjective as well too. So yeah, absolutely. So to wrap up, what I've been doing during the pandemic has been asking what your COVID activity has been recently. Baking bread, watching more soccer.
Mine, well, there's 2. So cricket, so I'm a massive cricket fan, and that's just started. And then the second one then is getting my garden sorted. So I moved into my house a couple of years ago, and there was quite a bit to do. And the garden was the last thing. But now my son's old enough to go in the garden because he's nearly 2. It's actually something I now need to sort out. So I'm currently sorting out the fence panels and just sort of tidying everything up on that way. So that's the plan for the next couple of weeks.
And is that food, or is it just, you know, that you growing just plants or vegetables, or?
It's just making it. It's just, so I've got a slide to build, got a mud kitchen to build, swings to build,
That's awesome.
and then just sorting out like the patio and stuff like that. There's a couple of like wobbly flags, so just fixing them, just so it's not a health hazard for when he can.
No, you're making me feel bad. I don't do any of this stuff.
No, to be honest, I wasn't going to be doing it, but the problem we've got in our house is there's no access to the back. There's no access to the back garden.
Okay.
Because where the access was, a conservatory was built there. So you have to access through the actual house itself. But when I speak to the gardeners to do it, basically the machines are too heavy to come through the house and they're not able to come through. So by default, I've had to do it myself, which I didn't want to do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, this has been great. I know. So James and I met on a implementation specific Slack channel called Pre-Flight. So if anybody's interested in that, hit either one of us up. I'll put your LinkedIn profile in here. But thanks so much. I'm going to hit stop on the recording and I'll just finish up with a couple last words and things like that. So thanks a ton. I'm going to stop the recording right now and I appreciate it.